I'm 76 years old, and the truth is, I didn't lose love all at once. I traded it away slowly, piece by piece, and by the time I noticed, the security I chose had slipped through my fingers too. My name is Margaret Hale. I'm sitting alone in a house that's too quiet now, listening to a clock I never bothered to replace because it still works. I used to think that was enough. Things that worked, things that lasted, things that didn't surprise you. When you reach my age, time stops feeling like something you have and starts feeling like something that's already been spent. I don't tell this story because I want forgiveness or understanding or sympathy. I'm telling it because there's a certain honesty that only comes when you realize there isn't much left to protect. I was practical my whole life. That's what people said about me. Sensible, reliable, someone you could count on. Those words followed me like a compliment, and I wore them proudly, even when they began to weigh more than they lifted. In my 20s, I fell in love with a man who didn't make sense on paper. His name was Daniel. He was kind in quiet ways. He noticed things, the way I took my coffee, the way I always folded napkins before sitting down. He didn't have much money, but he had time, and he gave it freely. Back then I thought time was cheap. My parents didn't like him, not openly, not cruelly, but with that polite concern that feels worse than anger. They asked about his plans, his future, his stability. Those were the words that mattered in our house. Stability, security, a solid footing. Around that same time, I met Richard. He was older, established, already climbing in his career. He owned a car that didn't rattle when it stopped. He talked about mortgages and pensions and 5-year plans. When he asked me out, my mother smiled in a way I'd never seen her smile at Daniel. I told myself I was choosing wisely. I told myself love was important, that safety mattered more. I told myself feelings calm down anyway, and what's left should be something dependable. Breaking things off with Daniel wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a conversation that felt unfinished, because it was. He asked me if I was sure. I said yes, because I needed to believe it. He nodded, and that was the last time someone looked at me like I was the only thing in the room. I married Richard within a year. The wedding photos still sit in a box somewhere, untouched. We built a life that looked good from the outside. A nice home, dinner parties, holidays planned months in advance. I learned how to keep things running smoothly. I became very good at it. What I didn't notice, at least not right away, was how quiet everything felt. Not peaceful, just quiet. Conversation stayed on the surface. Affection became scheduled, then optional, then rare. I told myself this was normal. This was adulthood. This was what grown women accepted. I kept waiting for the feeling to return, for warmth to grow where routine had settled. I always thought there was time. I didn't understand then that time doesn't announce when it's leaving. It just goes, while you're busy choosing what feels safe. Years passed the way they often do when nothing is technically wrong. Quietly, efficiently, without asking permission. Richard and I fell into patterns that worked. He left early. I kept the house in order. We discussed bills, neighbours, weather. When we disagreed, it was handled politely, like adults who didn't want to make a mess. I mistook that for maturity. I didn't see that we were slowly sanding ourselves down until there was nothing sharp enough to feel. People said we were lucky, stable, comfortable. I nodded along. I learned how to smile at the right moments, how to deflect questions about children with vague answers that didn't invite follow-up. We never decided not to have them. We just kept waiting until it felt like the right time. It never did. I worked part-time at first, then full-time. I told myself it was good for me. Independence mattered. Purpose mattered. What I didn't admit was that work filled the space where something else should have been. It gave me structure. It gave me an excuse. Daniel crossed my mind sometimes, usually in small, inconvenient moments. When I heard a song he used to hum, when someone laughed the way he did, head tilted slightly back, like surprise had caught him off guard. I always pushed the thought away. That chapter was closed. That was the deal I'd made with myself. Loss doesn't arrive with sirens. It accumulates quietly. A missed dinner because of a meeting. A conversation postponed because tomorrow would be easier. A habit of choosing efficiency over presence. None of it felt dangerous on its own. Richard and I aged alongside each other, but not together. His world narrowed to work and routine. Mine did too, though I told myself I was content. We slept on the same bed, like two people sharing a waiting room. When he reached for me, it felt unfamiliar. When he didn't, it felt like relief. I didn't know what that said about me, and I wasn't ready to find out. The turning point didn't feel like one at the time. Richard got sick. Nothing sudden, just a slow decline that made the future smaller. Hospital rooms have a way of stripping life down to essentials. Beeping machines, plastic chairs, long hours where words feel unnecessary. I sat beside him every day. I did what was expected. I held his hand. I listened when he spoke. And still there was a distance I couldn't cross, no matter how close I sat. We had built a life on responsibility, and responsibility was all I had left to give. He died on the Tuesday morning, quietly, the way he lived. After the funeral, people told me how strong I was, how well I handled things. I thanked them. I always knew how to do that. What I didn't know was how to sit in the silence afterward, when the structure fell away and there was nothing left to manage. That was when the weight of all the small choices finally settled, not as panic, as clarity. I realized I had spent my life preparing for a future that no longer existed, and avoiding a present I had already lost. And there was no one left to blame but myself. Grief is supposed to feel loud, I think. At least that's what I expected. Crying, breaking, something dramatic enough to justify the emptiness that followed. But what I felt was quieter than that, a long, steady ache, like a room that had been emptied and never refurnished. I stayed busy at first, sorting paperwork, donating clothes, cancelling subscriptions. There was comfort in tasks with clear endings. They didn't ask anything of me beyond completion. At night, the house felt too large. even though it had never changed size. I slept on my side of the bed and left the other untouched, not out of devotion, but habit. It was during those nights that Daniel came back to me, not as regret, not at first, just as memory. His voice, his patience, the way he once waited outside my office for nearly an hour because he knew I'd forget the time. I remembered how irritated I'd been then, how important my schedule felt. I tried to imagine what my life would have looked like if I had chosen differently. I didn't romanticize it. I knew there would have been struggles. Money would have been tight, plans uncertain. But I also knew there would have been laughter where there had been silence. There would have been moments that didn't need justifying. I found out years later that Daniel had married, had children. He died before I ever worked up the courage to reach out. That knowledge settled in me like something final, not sharp, just heavy. There would be no conversation, no explanation, no chance to ask if I mattered the way he once mattered to me. That's the part people don't talk about. It's not the pain of losing someone, it's the pain of realizing the loss happened long before you noticed, and that time has sealed it shut. Now, at 76, I understand something I didn't when I was younger. Security isn't the absence of risk. It's the presence of something worth holding on to. I thought I was protecting myself. What I was really doing was postponing my life. If I could speak to you, really speak, I wouldn't tell you what to choose. I don't believe in that anymore. I would only tell you this. Pay attention to what quietly disappears while you're busy making things safe. I don't have many years left. I feel that in my bones, in the way mornings take longer and evenings arrive sooner than they used to. I've made peace with that. What I'm still learning to live with is the knowledge that I was loved once, deeply, and I convinced myself it wasn't practical. Some truths don't arrive in time to change anything. They arrive only to be carried. That's what I'm doing now, carrying it, and telling the truth while I still can.